I'm a reporter who investigated a Florida psychiatric hospital that earns millions by trapping patients against their will. Ask me anything. I'm Neil Beatty, an investigative reporter at the Tampa Bay Times. I spent the last several months looking into a psychiatric hospital that forcibly holds patients for days longer than allowed while running up their medical bills. I found that North Tampa behavioral health uses loopholes in Florida's mental health law to trap people at the worst moments of their lives. To piece together the methods the hospital used to hold people, I interviewed 15 patients, analyzed thousands of hospital admission records, and read hundreds of police reports, state inspections, court records and financial filings. In recent years, the hospital has been one of the most profitable psychiatric hospitals in Florida. It's also stood out for its shaky safety record. The hospital told us it had 75 serious incidents, assaults, injuries, runaway patients in the 70 months it has been open. Patients have been brutally attacked or allowed to attempt suicide inside its walls. It has also been cited by the state more often than almost any other psychiatric facility. Last year, it hired its 5th CEO in 5 years. Brian B.J. Coleman was a quarterback on the Green Bay Packers practice squad in 2012 and 2013. Played indoor and Canadian football, was vice president of sales for a trucking company, and consulted on employee benefits. He has no experience in healthcare. Now he runs the 126-bed hospital. We also found that the hospital is part of a large chain of behavioral health facilities called Acadia Healthcare, which has had problems across the country. Our reporting on North Tampa Behavioral and Acadia is continuing. How did you first find out about this facility? Do you think anything will be done regarding the facility as a result of your reporting? This all started with a tip from a family. A woman called and said her 80-year-old mother was trapped inside. She was struggling to see her or even speak to a doctor. She said, during one of the few allowed visiting hours, she met other families with almost identical experiences. I started calling around and heard the same thing again and again. It's too soon to tell what will happen, but I'll be reporting and keeping an eye out. Is any legal action being taken to stop this and hold the hospital accountable? This sounds like a dystopian novel come to life. Some of these patients would occasionally hire lawyers to help get them out. The presence of a lawyer sometimes made things smoother, but not always. I haven't seen any larger legal action take place. Hey op, do you have any advice for me? Reading your story was shocking. This happened to me in Texas just a year ago. It ruined my entire university graduation and destroyed my mental health. There's nothing that provoked anxiety and hopelessness more than being forced to stay in a mental facility against your will for days while you effectively fail your classes by absence. How prevalent are these places across the US, and what rights do we have? I've been unable to pay these bills, which to me seem more like ransom money. Can I sue? How successful are people who challenge their experiences in court? My story: I was beginning my final semester of senior year at Texas A&M. Never once had a panic attack, was a great student in biochemistry, and I must have been pretty ignorant about mental health. I was up late several nights studying when I went to a party in my apartment complex. Suddenly I had my first ever panic attack and was paranoid that I got poisoned. I called the ambulance and, in my lack of sleep, freaked out state, told them I might have taken too many pills. At the time, I realized I was being paranoid, so I wanted them to think it was an accident. Clearly I was just not thinking straight. It was a traumatic moment in my usually boring life that took a random turn. My first panic attack, I had truly no idea what those were before. Next thing I know, I'm sleepy, in the hospital, and the sheriff is telling me to sign some forms. I'm a student, I think it's an insurance thing. I sign. Finally they bring a car around with 2 police officers and take me to a psych hospital. I'm told I can't leave. I'm trapped in there for nearly a week. I fail my classes for that semester, and the screaming people in the building just make it worse. I'm treated like a crazy person. I'm in shock, crying. Now I look insane. I start to think I've gone mad. Every day I wake up, I'm told I can't leave, since I'm a threat to myself and others. I can't use my cell phone. I can't go anywhere but my room and the cafeteria by escort. They tell me I would have to stay longer if I don't participate in group therapy. Everyone on staff looks at me like a nut job and convinces me I'm mad. After a week, I'm let out. My family doesn't look at me the same way, and I have no classes to go back to. It's taken over a year to recover from this. For those who don't understand why this affected me so bad, I don't blame you. I never took mental health complaints seriously before this. This can happen to anyone, and it can happen randomly. And to be treated this way is a life-altering trauma. I still have moments where I wonder if I've gone insane, sparked by simple things like being tired at the end of the day or forgetting my keys. It's worse when I think about it, worrying that if I have another moment of stress, that cops will take me away and send me to an institution. Being institutionalized against your will, losing your college graduation, having family told you're mental, and spending a week confined to a wing with actual insane men screaming at you. This can ruin years of your life. I eventually graduated a year later, did well on GRS, and put my life back on track. But what should have been a simple case of first panic attack turned into a year of hopelessness and paranoia. All because there's an entire industry designed to capitalize on people's trauma and incentivized to make it worse. To clarify, some people are wondering if this was an acceptable misunderstanding. So I'll go over what happened here. I had a panic attack. It was my first one. I called an ambulance since I knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. They took me to the hospital. I told them maybe it was a stroke. Maybe I took Vyvanse twice without realizing it. Maybe my friend poisoned me. I don't know. Help me. I never suggested I tried to kill myself. The hospital was slow that night. When they put me in a room, there was no need to move me anywhere. They could have simply waited till morning, when I was awake, less disoriented, and could talk with them about what might have happened. Instead they make me sign a paper for treatment and now I'm being sent to an institution. What if I had been in a car crash and had a concussion? I'd be disoriented the same way. Should they assume he may have done it to commit suicide? Let's make him sign this form and throw him in the crazy house to be safe. When the hospital isn't crowded, I literally just arrived. It's the middle of the night, and nobody has interviewed me to ask what happened. Institutionalizing someone like that doesn't happen by mistake. That only happens when you deliberately take advantage of a patient, wait 6 hours and ask me, jumping the gun and marking down probably suicide, but he can't answer right now, so we haven't talked to him about it isn't rational, and it doesn't happen by mistake. I can't imagine this is legal, but apparently it is. Not enough people know this is going on, and it happens way too often. I work in healthcare and see the Baker Act misapplied pretty routinely. Sometimes even to just prevent a patient from leaving IAmA when they pose no threat to themselves or others. Do you think it's time to revisit and reform the Baker Act? I've thought about this before, but I don't think there is any political will for changing the law. It affects so few people and there is all this paranoia around preventing mass shootings. I'm not sure, TBH. Experts say the law itself is pretty strict about ensuring patients are guaranteed certain rights and aren't exploited. But there is a trend of facilities following incorrect interpretations of the law. Do you have any recommendations for people to stay safe based on anything you have learned? For example, if a person felt wary of something like this going on near them, but still needed mental health help, are they just screwed? No, they should definitely seek help. We did identify problems here, but the system as a whole is important, and people who need mental health help should seek it. I think a little bit of research ahead of time could help. The online reviews from this facility had already echoed some of the issues we found. Also, there are generally public records about state inspections online. Wow, a journalist that investigates real issues? That's a nice change from the trend. Thank you. What do you think of the current state of journalism in the US and the UK? Wow, that's a big question. I don't really know. I think it's a hard time for journalism. The industry has been hurting financially for a while and local papers have been taking the worst of it. But some of the best journalism is still being done at those papers and that keeps me going. Are most mental patients being held against their will in this facility? Yes. Most of the patients are brought in under the state's mental health law, the Baker Act. Roughly 2/3 of the total patients are brought in involuntarily. Hey Neil. First off, I wanted to thank you for standing up for psych patients, because not enough people will. Are you familiar with the troubled teen industry? It sounds really similar to what you've been looking into. Often, consultants for the clinics will give false or exaggerated diagnoses and refer kids to programs they receive a kickback from. The kids are bounced around different clinics until the parents run out of money or catch on to the scam. It's a huge industry in the US and incredibly damaging to the patients. I was stuck in the troubled teen industry as a patient for 2 years, and years later I still struggle with PTSD from being put in solitary, kicked, slapped, and forced to skip meals as punishment. Thanks for your time and the work that you do. I haven't heard about this, but I'll definitely read more. We'll put it on my reading list. Thank you for your kind words. If one found themselves trapped against their will, what is the best advice you have for them? This is a good question, and a difficult question. The law does allow hospitals to hold people who may harm themselves or others, but it also outlines many rights for those patients. I think my best advice is for patients to know their rights and know the state organizations you can contact if you feel like those rights are being violated. What do you hope comes from your article? My main hope is that more people read it and are aware of the issues we outlined. Almost all of the families I spoke to said they were completely unaware of any problems when they ended up at the hospital. In fact, their first thought was generally how nice it looked from the outside. To forcibly hold a Baker Act patient for more than 3 days, a mental health center must file a petition in court. Under the law, a judge has 5 workdays to rule on the case. North Tampa Behavioral filed 592 such petitions last year, but it dropped 86% of them before the hearing. Records show hundreds of patients were stuck waiting to see a judge, but never saw one. Meanwhile, their bills grew. As someone who works at a mental health care facility, I found this to be horrifying. Do you mean the patients and the 86% thought they needed to wait to see a judge when in actuality their petition had been dropped? Or just the remaining 14%? Also, did you find that the 14% for which a petition for extension remained were being held for legitimate reasons? While the incidents you documented in your article certainly do not seem to meet criteria for extension, no threat to self or others, not incompetent, etc., there are certainly patients who do pose a major risk or are seriously ill and cannot make rational decisions. They need to stay in a facility. Was this the case for any in the 14%? 86% of these people were waiting for hearing, but the hearing never happened. I do agree that some patients definitely do meet criteria. I had no way of telling how many though. The county court always grants these petitions when they go to hearing, and the petitions themselves are not public record, so I couldn't personally see them. Subscribe for more added content.